Okay,
so בוקר טוב and שבוע טוב. אמן, אמן, אמן. בשורות טובות. בשורות טובות. We continue our learning of Rav Kook. And last time we spoke about the first very words that he wrote in Eretz Israel in these, if you remember, 8 big notebooks of his. From which most of the books that we are familiar with were extracted, meaning that he wrote in a very, as we spoke about, inspirational way, just writing and writing and writing. And later, mostly his son, Rav Yehuda, but also one of his students, about whom maybe would be able to speak as we would finish the shiur today, Rav David Cohen, known better as the Nazir. So he also wrote edited one of Rav Kook's books. Rav Kook himself, as he himself wrote many times, he was not made for writing in a mesudar way, in an ordered way, in a systematic way. He was a man of the moment, of giving very deep and insights, but connecting all of these dots and making them into one systematical thought. That is something that only his son and students did with his writings. With his agreement, already in his own lifetime, he gave these notebooks to them, asking them to edit from it books. So that's something that it's not something that was done against his will in any sort of way. But however, as happens editing, many of what he wrote remained on the editing room floor, as they say. And for many, many years, we only had the paragraphs that were taken. And I don't know the percentage, but many, many paragraphs were just stayed out for many reasons, because mainly because Rav Yehuda or Rav David Cohen didn't feel that they can be integrated into some type of, as we say, a philosophical system. So they remained outside, or maybe sometimes because Rav Yehuda and Rav David Cohen felt that they were too radical. And if you would publish them as it was, Rav Kook was swimming against the current. And if you would publish things that are even more radical, then you may find he would completely lose all credibility in the Haredi world, and they didn't want that. At least back then, they still hoped that the fissure between what is now called modern Orthodox or Dati Leumi and Haredi can still be bridged. Well, we also still hope that, but it seems that it would take more time maybe than what they hoped. So at least in those years, they self-censored some of Rav Kook's writings that they felt were too radical and may have too great of an impact on how things would be received, or they would not be understood correctly. So many material stayed, as I said, on the floor. Only much later, about 25 years ago, so decades after the passing of Rav Kook, these notebooks were published, first in a pirate form, not exactly according to the will of the people in Yeshivat Merkaz Harav, which is the yeshiva that was established by Rav Kook. We'll speak about that Be'ezrat Hashem next week. So they were holding these treasures. So not exactly according to the will. However, things got out, and as you know, 30 years ago, as the internet was beginning to catch steam, it became more and more difficult to censor or to close things down in a way that people won't look at, because it's enough nowadays. One man with a phone is enough in order to leak all of the United States secrets, as happened just a few years ago. And it happens very quickly, and it's very difficult to control it. And that's what happened with these notebooks. And in the end, they decided that it's better to publish them in a mesudar way, so at least everything would be out in a correct form and not a snapshot here and a snapshot there. So all of this material is now published and is online and can be found. It's just difficult to read, because it's the language of Rav Kook. And again, these are things that he wrote to himself. So even the effort that he made when he was writing for others was not done here. So it's very raw, rough material, but it's beautiful, very inspirational, and very, very deep. And we quoted the first paragraph of these 8 notebooks, שמונה קבצים, we quoted it last week, in which he spoke, if you remember, about he spoke about the different ways that you have to exercise Torah and mitzvot. And obviously the king's way is just to be observant, as we all, of Torah and mitzvot. However, there may be people from time to time that would, we may say, they would realize the ideals of Torah and mitzvot in other ways, which is, Rav Kook would say immediately, and I emphasized also last week, is not ideal. The ideal is that the same person that is shaking the lulav would be the same person that would make aliyah, and would be the same person that fights the wars of Am Yisrael, etc., etc., etc. But if the people that shake the lulav as a code name are not able to include in themselves all the other aspects of the Torah, these aspects are moving in the world, right? And they are looking for a way to express themselves. And in some people, they would just appear. And if we as the Rabbanim, we as what is called today the Orthodox, would not be able to create a large enough Torah to include these other aspects, then the people that connect to the other aspects would abandon the Orthodox way of Torah and mitzvot in order to answer, to heed their own calling, which is still a holy calling. So that's what we said now. I hope it is understood. But you can understand why it's something that is very radical. Because what he does is giving some type of a legitimation and validation to people that abandon the path of Torah and mitzvot. Now, again, for us, it's somewhat easier to speak about it because secularity is a fact. It's already 150 years old, at least, fact. And more than 100 years now that the majority of Am Yisrael are non-observant to one or the other degree. So accepting it as a fact and trying to find maybe good things in it is something that for us is easier. But if you take yourself now 100 years ago, and we are in the middle of a war against secularism and against people leaving the path and against people abandoning Torah and mitzvot, even some legitimation that is given to people that abandon Torah and mitzvot is looked upon, and not only frowned upon, is looked as an epicursus in itself, and that would get Rav Kook to many troubles, as Be'ezrat Hashem will describe today. But however, he did not back down, and he continued to develop this way of thinking. So let's now continue to the third source in your pages. I would also share it in the Zoom. Okay, can you see it? Okay, source Gimel. So what is this source? This source is from a eulogy that Rav Kook gave in 1904, just a few months after he came down from the ship in the shore of Yafo. Who was he eulogizing? That's right. So in the 3rd of July, 1904, that was the ptira, the passing of Herzl. Now, of course, Herzl can deserve a course of itself, and we cannot right now describe Herzl in full detail, but I think it is pretty well known that Herzl, while he came from a assimilating Jewish family, he became a news reporter and when he was reporting for a Goyish newspaper, and when he was reporting on the Dreyfus affair in France, and he saw the anti-Semitism that while the Jews in France enjoyed emancipation, that was the homeland of emancipation, and it seemed as they can reach the highest levels in the army and in the government, suddenly as the Dreyfus affair surfaced, all of the old anti-Semitism, the ugly anti-Semitism raised its head, and we may be able to sympathize with what Herzl feels back then. And he sees that, and he understands suddenly that all of the dream of assimilation that maybe his parents and many of his contemporaries were captured in, this dream is not going to last. It is not going to succeed. The Jews would not be able to live quietly and freely in other people's homes. What they need to do is to have their own home. Now, he's not coming there from any religious point of view. He doesn't, I mean, he was a secular man. And if you'd ask him, if you'd just read his Altneuland, read his Old New Land, and you will see that he hoped that the state that would be established would be a secular one. However, if the rabbis would have, he tried to make contact, especially with the Hasidic rabbis of Eastern Europe, because he knew that if he wants masses, and he wanted masses, then that is the way to go. Because when you speak about the secular people, you have to convince each one of them separately. But in the Hasidut, if you are able to convince the Rebbe, then you can have 10, 20,000 men immediately coming to your command. So that's a very big thing. It's a very important shortcut. So he did his best. However, as is natural, you can only cry about that now after everything that happened. And we know the history. Obviously, no one knew what is going to happen. Herzl was shouting that things are going to turn very bad. I don't think that he imagined how bad things are going to turn. However, the Rebbe saw a secular man coming to them and trying to convince them to give him his men, his people, their people. And obviously, they were not going to cooperate with that. And so that didn't work. Again, we can speak about that very length, but the bottom line is that it didn't work. Not because Herzl did not even know how to speak in their language, and because with him there were, while he was, as I said, I think he was extremely pragmatic. And if the only way to have a state would be a religious state, he would have gone with that. I think that's a fair description. Not happily, but he would have gone with it because he thought that it's a pikuach nefesh, right? If I would use my own terms, to have a Jewish state that the Jews can run to. However, with him, there were many other people, the leaders of the Zionist movement that he was establishing, that were hardcore atheists and secular, and they would not have the Rabbanim running the show, not at all. And so there were very good reasons for the rabbis not to go along with Herzl. However, it was in the end, again, as we know now, it would have been, the outcome, I think, would have been very different if we would have an influx of 300,000 Haredi Jews coming in from here. Just imagine that in the beginning of the 20th century. That was something that was feasible. It was not, what I'm speaking now, these are not pipe dreams. Now it is pipe dreams because it didn't happen. And after history is having its say, no one can change it. But this is something that could have been done. And just imagine how things would have turned out. How many people could have been saved, and what would be the image of the Jewish state nowadays if it would have been established by people that are Shomer Torah mitzvot. We can, as I said, we can only lament and maybe try to learn our lesson, which is more difficult. Okay, so Theodor Herzl established the Zionist movement, and he had these congresses, and Jews from all over the world came in, and he was able to create, now this is in itself is something very, very interesting. He was able to present himself to the Goyim as the representative of the Jewish nation, which, was very dubious at the time. Meaning they had elections and different communities were sending their delegates. Everything was very nice. How much percentage of the Jewish people did he really have in his organization? Very hard to know. But however, there was no competing organization. So he presented himself as not as the king of the Jews, but as he was a very democratic person in the terms of the 19th century. So he presented himself as the elected head of the Jewish people, and he was, debating and going to the Turkish Sultan and to the other kings of Europe and dealing with them in order to receive permission to settle the Jews and to create some type of a political entity, not necessarily a state. The Sultan was not going to have that, but at least some type of an autonomy, as we would say today, in Eretz Israel, in Palestine. And they accept more or less. It's a nice that it was more or less accepted. Meaning this, all of this. How would they say? I don't want to call it a show, but it was not much more than that. But it was accepted. It was accepted. He was able, and the Jews accept. Some of them accepted. Anyhow, he did not live long. As you know, Herzl died young. He had a heart failure. Many say that the heart failure is connected to his failure, his practical failure in connecting all of the Jews around him and in being able to speak with the Sultan. All of that is, of course, before the First World War. So the Eretz Israel is controlled by the Ottoman Empire. And he hoped that he would be able to recruit Baron Ginsburg maybe to buy all of Eretz Israel from the Sultan in one sweep deal. Right? That would be like a Trump deal now, or that like the Louisiana deal between the United States and France. And these are things that would have been maybe able to be done. Now, Baron Ginsburg decided that he's going, Baron Hirsch decided that he's going to support not a deal in Eretz Israel, which is a very complicated place in the Middle East, but instead, which is a safer place. No, Argentina. He went for Argentina. Herzl went to Uganda after understanding that he won't be able to establish a state in Eretz Israel or even to open the gate, because the Turkish Sultan, while he was desperate for money and desperate for international legitimation, one thing he was not going to do, and that is to give Yerushalayim and some of the holy places in Eretz Israel to a bunch of Jews. That is not something that's going to happen even for money. So he was not willing to do that. And then, as you said correctly, Herzl went with a British, and so they were willing to give Herzl, who was not able to prove in any way, or demonstrate that he has masses of Jews behind him. But they were willing, the British had suggested in a very serious way to give him very large stakes of land in Uganda. Now, was it theirs to give? I would leave this question. This is not right now our discussion, but they felt that it's theirs to give. By the way, they did the same here. All of the eastern part of Eretz Israel, the mandatory Eretz Israel, included also all of what is now called Jordan. And it was supposed to be part of the Jewish homeland that the British were given the mandate in order to establish. However, because King Faisal was helping them in the war, in the First World War, so they decided to benefit him, to give him a gift. Now, what is better than giving a gift that belongs to someone else? That's the cheapest way to give gifts. And they were, I apologize to the people here coming from England. That's yeah, but however, the easiest way to establish a museum is by taking the artifacts of all the other nations, and the easiest way to give gifts is by giving gifts belonging to others, and that's exactly what they did. So what they did was giving the eastern side of the Jordan. That's what they did here. And what they suggested to Herzl, now that's after, of course, First World War. But before First World War, they didn't control Eretz Israel in the Middle East, but they did control Africa. And they suggested, I would guess without consulting first with the natives that they would give the Jews very large parts of Uganda. And Herzl was in favor. Herzl was in favor. Why? Because for him, the most urgent thing was to get the Jews out of Eastern Europe. Because who knows what is going to happen? He didn't imagine that the enlightened Germans would be the ones that in the end would be the ultimate enemy of the Jewish people. He thought these are going to be the Russians. However, one thing was true, the Jews are not safe in Europe. They are not safe, as I said earlier, in anyone's else land and home. They need to have their own land and their own home. And if it would be in Uganda, let it be. And when one day would be able to go to Eretz Israel, we'll do that. That's what he tried to sell to the Jews that were with him in the Congress Hatzioni. Very interestingly, the Datiim, the Mizrahi, were more or less they supported everything that Herzl said. And they supported, can you imagine it now? It's so interesting. So what we would call today the Dati Leumi camp, the Mizrahi, which was a very big party, they supported the Uganda suggestion with Herzl. While the Chovevei Tzion, the Eastern European Jews that were called themselves Chovevei Tzion, and they were partly religious, but many of them were not. They completely opposed. They said, no Uganda can ever replace Eretz Israel. If you want to have a Jewish center, you need to do it in the Jewish geographical center. So they opposed it. The suggestion went through, and then they sent a delegation to a committee to see the land, and the land was not exactly what they hoped. The British did not give the best lands in Africa, as you can guess. And so in the end, it didn't go through. There was too much of opposition on one hand, and the offer was not good enough for this proposition to go through. So it failed. And Herzl thought or felt that that is something that is very worrisome, because again, he felt a very strong urgency that the Jews need to have their own political entity. And he continued to try and to do his attempts. However, as I said, in 1904, in a very young age, he passed away. Very hopeful on one hand, but on the other hand, very pessimistic about the future of the Jews in Europe. And we know that he was very right. Yes, he was very right. Now, they decided to take him for burial in Eretz Israel. As we know, he's buried in Har Herzl in Jerusalem. And the body comes to Yafo. And Rav Kook decides to give a eulogy, a hesped, for Herzl. Now, again, I don't know what do we feel about that. But the hesped was given in the main shul in Yafo. Now, even today, I think, let's say that the prime minister, Chas v'Chaila, would pass away, or a president. Would it be acceptable that in the shul, the Rav would give a hesped? It's even today, I think, it would raise some eyebrows. But back then, to give a hesped for Herzl, you can say many good things about him. You can say that he didn't ever put filling on Yom Kippur on Shabbat. But other mitzvot, it would be very difficult. It would be very difficult. Now, again, take yourself to that time in which there is a war being waged. And the Orthodox are, what is the nice word for losing blood? Hemorrhaging? So they are hemorrhaging. And things look very, very bleak, and they were bleak. And we live now with the consequences, with 80% of the people that are not observant. So when you are in a war, you are in a war. How can you begin to eulogize someone from the other camp? And do it in a shul. So some of the extremists, as the Kanaim, they tried to stop Rav Kook, this new Rav coming in and maybe not understanding what is going on, maybe he's naive. He was not naive, he knew exactly what he was doing, but they tried maybe to stop him that way. He would not be stopped. He gave the Hesped, and see the Hesped, I mean, you can say that maybe that Herzl was a nice person, he was trying to bring the Jews back to Eretz Israel. There are nice things that you can say. He went much, much beyond, and already here we can see that he is not only open to other ways, as we said earlier, maybe there are mitzvot that we are not able to accomplish in our own Orthodox camp, and that's why we need the assistance of other camps, at least until we would be able to integrate these mitzvot into our midst. Is now presenting a very important view on history and the historical procedures that in the 19th century and to this day we are living through. So let's now begin after all of this long introduction. Source Gimel, המספד בירושלים. It's a...
Did they ever meet?
Not to my knowledge. Now that's a short quote. The Hesped was longer. Rav Kook tended to speak somewhat longish. So here it's a short, it's a sort of expert from the Hesped, from the eulogy. צריך להבין בכלל. למה אנו צריכים לשני משיחים? So I begin the quote here with the question. He begins with a presentation of the concept of the two Meshachim, two messiahs. One is Mashiach ben David and one is Mashiach ben Yosef. Now just think about it. You are sitting there in the Hesped for Herzl, this Chiloni leader of the Jewish people, and Rav Kook begins his eulogy with speaking about two Meshachim, and you sit there and you all know what is going to happen here. And he speaks about these two Meshachim. And he says, we have to understand, why do we need two Meshachim? Mשיח ben Yosef ומשיח ben David. והרי התכלית המכוון, the goal that we are looking for, we aspire for, הוא שנשיא אחד יהיה לכולם. דוד עבדי, נשיא להם לעולם. Obviously, we are hoping for the time of a king from the house of David. Why do we speak even about a משיח ben Yosef? אמנם, says Rav Kook, כשם שיצר השם יתברך באדם, הגוף והנשמה, ותכלית השלמות הוא שיהיה הגוף חזק ואמיץ ומפותח כראוי, והנשימה בריאה ומשוכללת. He says, if you look at the human being, then you have a body and you have a soul. And you need the body to be strong and able, and you need the soul to be wise and competent and deep and rich. And they need to go together, the both of them. And he says, in the same way, כן הכין בישראל בייחוד שני אלה הכוחות, also in Am Israel, not only in Reb Israel, as they say, or not only in the singular, but also in the nation as a whole. שני אלה הכוחות, there are these two forces. הכוח המקביל לערך הגוף האנושי, השוקק לטובת האומה במעמדה ושכלולה החומרי. והצד השני, עצם הכוח לשכלול הרוחניות בעצמה. Says, you have in Am Israel, you need a body, what is English is called a body politic, right? You need the body, the muscles, the skin, the economy, and you need the spirit. The spirit can only reside inside the body. Now, again, maybe for us, דתי לאומיים, decades later, it's simple, right? I mean, in a week and a half, I'm going to go to the army. Well, this is part of the muscles of the body politic of the Jewish people. But again, take yourself and plant yourself a century ago. The Jews need a body? The Jew is a spiritual being. What are you speaking about? The body should also be spiritual. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu would fire bolts from the heaven and kill the enemy of the Jews. No, isn't that what we dream about? And there would be nesharim, right? Eagles coming and taking the Jews from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Israel, and then the temple would come down from the heavens. We don't need to erect any body. Body is for the goyim. The Jews do not do, how do you say, kosher, right? Exercise. A good Jew does not exercise. He learns Torah. Ain't that right? That's again, I'm making a little fun of that, but that's what the Jew thought for hundreds of years. At least many of them. And many still think. And many still hold. Yes, that is right. And Rav Kook says, no. If you want, you can have a spirit without a body, but you know how does it, what is the name of a spirit without a body? It's called someone dead. It's called someone dead. And now the body cannot survive without the spirit. There is a difference. The spirit can survive without the body, and that's what we call the afterlife. The body without the spirit rots in the ground. Now, that's what happened to Am Israel in the Galut, in the exile. That is death. Exile is death. But the spirit can continue and roam the land. But it cannot really reach its full potential without being connected to a body. So you need a resurrection. You need a tchiyat hametim. That's part of the salvation of redemption, is tchiyat hametim. As well as there would be, Be'ezrat Hashem, a tchiyat hametim for the individuals, when the body would be resurrected and the spirit would come down. I'm coming down. There is no up and down, you understand? Spirit is not about geography. But that's the terms that we use. So the spirits would come down from heaven and re-inhabit the body. So Am Israel, which remained only in spiritual existence, learning Torah, performing the spiritual mitzvot, in the Chutz La'aretz, needs to come back to the body which is waiting for him in Eretz Israel, rebuild this body politic, and then inhabit, the spirit needs to inhabit the body. So why there is a need for two types of Meshachim, you can already see. Because the first Mashiach, the Mashiach ben Yosef, should prepare the body. And only then can come the Mashiach ben David and put spirit into this body. That's why you need first Shaul, and only then David. Shaul would build the Israeli kingdom, but only David can build the Beit HaMikdash and put the spirit into this kingdom. Now, in an ideal world, this process would be done in full harmony, that the spirit itself would collect the dust from the land and build the body for it to go into. But the world that we live in is not ideal. And we ourselves, as people, as human beings, are not ideal. And as it happens to be, when you are very spiritual, it is extremely difficult for you to hold the dust and connect it back. Because you are a spirit. And you want to live in the spiritual world. You don't want to put your hands into the mud. And so you need someone else. Maybe you do not need, but it happens to be, many times it would happen, that you will need someone else, less spiritual, to do this physical work of creating the body. And that is Mashiach ben Yosef. He is less spiritual than Mashiach ben David, at least on the surface. Under the surface, obviously, is connected to the divine presence. Otherwise, he won't be able to do everything that he is doing. What is connecting, what is drawing Mashiach ben Yosef to Eretz Israel? If he's not religious, if he's not spiritual. So why in Eretz Israel? What is connecting him, obviously, is Hashem. Hashem is drawing him in order to create this body. And only him can be drawn. Because the rabbis are, Baruch Hashem, they are full of Torah and mitzvot and masim tovim, and they have no room in there. It's unfortunate, but it seems that they cannot give the space for the needs of the body. For 2,000 years, we were trained to ignore the body and to invest only in the spirit and to ridicule, right? The Gentiles, that they have strong empires and they have armies, but they don't understand what is really important. What is really important is the spirit. That is completely right. But everything taken to the extreme is harmful. And when this approach was taken to the extreme, and it had, in a sense, it had to be taken to the extreme because there was no other way to keep this thing alive, the spirit alive, but to completely ignore all the body needs, because the body could not be natured when we were in Chutz La'aretz, we were in Galut. But now reconnecting this neshama to a body That's a very difficult process. We are still in the middle of it. The neshama still doesn't want to go down into this world. Right? They say there is such a midrash that the neshama, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell her, go down. Neshama says, no, I don't want, I'm happy here in heaven. And God says, no, you need to go down. It would be a yerida letzorech aliyah. Now you're going down, but it will enable you to grow and to enrich yourself. And in the end, he has to force it to go down. And they say that's why the baby is crying when it's being born. And they say that when the baby is being born, then everyone is happy and the baby is crying. But when the neshama goes back up, then if it's neshama that fulfilled his duty here, then everyone is crying, but the neshama is happy. It's something to think about. Yeah, something to think about. So when the neshama, now we speak about the general neshama, the national neshama of Am Yisrael, needs to be put back into a body. It resists. This resistance is expressing itself through the people that are much connected to the neshama. Who are the people that are the most connected to the neshama of Am Yisrael? These are the barriers of Torah. So the rabbis, these are the people that would oppose. It seems as strange as the paradox. Why would the rabbis oppose the Zionist movement? They were supposed to hug it. But there is a very deep, it's not only politics. There is a very deep spiritual reason to that. So you see how Rav Kook is beginning to explain history in a very deep sense, loading it with a very deep meaning. He says the opposition is not by accident. It's because there is a natural resistance of the neshama to be put back into the shackles of the body. Let's go back to what he writes here. והנה, בתור עקבא דמשיח בן יוסף, נגלה חזון הציונות בדורנו. So the Zion, it doesn't say Herzl is Mashiach ben Yosef. It stops short of saying this sentence, the whole thing would have been exploded. But it stops just one sentence before that. He says, the Zionut is the manifestation of Mashiach ben Yosef in our lifetime, being in his lifetime, in the 19th century. Why? Because what is the Zionut is interested in? The Zionut says, we are, and Rav Kook lamented this sentence, but in the Zionut has declared, הציונות דבר אין לה עם הדת. So Zionism has nothing to do with the Jewish religion. We only are about politics. Now they saw that as a sentence that is supposed to naturalize the opposition of the rabbis, because we are saying freedom of religion, you can come, you can be completely religious, everything is fine. But for Rav Kook, that was a knife in his heart, because he says, no, Zionut has very much to do with religion, because there would have been no Zionism without religion, without the aspiration to God, which in some people express itself as the aspiration for Eretz Israel, to the divine place. We aspire to the divine. This aspiration can express itself in Torah and mitzvot, in the spiritual realm. It can express itself in the physical realm. Now, obviously, it should support itself in both realms. But again, this is not an ideal world. And we are not ideal people, at least not yet. So he says, Zionism is Mashiach ben Yosef. Understand, let this sentence sink. It's amazing. He's standing there only a few months after coming off the boat. And he is, what he says is explosive. There is a debate to what extent should the Orthodox, again, the word Orthodox, I said 100 times, is anachronistic. But the Yereim, the Charedim, however we would call them, the observant, to what extent they should cooperate with a movement which is nice because it brings Jews back to Eretz Israel, which may be a mitzvah, depends on the different opinions. However, they are secular, so to what extent do we cooperate with them? And Mizrahi has one answer, and the Agudat Israel has a different answer. But Rav Kook is changing the rules of the game. He says the question is not to what extent should we cooperate with someone that is secular but also has good sides. We speak here about Geula, we speak here about Mashiach, we speak here about redemption. This is not the regular way of things. All of our considerations should be very different. So he says, משיח בן יוסף is the ציונות, הנוטה לצד הכללי ביותר. Now, the ציונות is about body. Now, if it's about body without spirit, then you know what is going to happen? They would feel more in common with the goyim than with their brothers, their Jew brothers that are Orthodox. Why? Because what they are now focused on is about building, as I said, the body politic. Now, the body politic is not very different from the one of France or the one of Germany or the one, I think that from Russia they did try to separate themselves, but in the end, it's the question of how do you build a politic? All nations have a politic, just as all human beings have a body. Or you know what? Even all the living beings have a body. Both the human and the horse. The difference is in the spirit. So the tzionut is connecting, it's easier for it to connect with the goyim than with the Haredi, which is what they saw back then, and to some extent, we see to this day. Which again is if you would come from Mars, right? It's a paradox. Because Zionism is about the Jewish nationality. Without Jewish nationality, there is no existence to Zionism. Part of the arguments that the enemies of Zionism try to advance is that Jewishness is not a nationality, but a religion, and as such, it does not deserve a state. So if you want to be a Zionist, one of your very first assumptions must be that Jewishness is not only a religion, but also a nation. So you would have imagined that people that see themselves as Zionists would hug every Jew because he is the reason for their existence. And it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. There is a bitter fight. And the bitter fight is because the Zionism, again, secular Zionism, feel itself more at home speaking with a national Frenchman or a national German than speaking with a Haredi. It's just a description of reality. But Rav Kook also gives it a very deep meaning. I continue. ומצד חסרון הכשרתו אין הכוחות מתאחדים. We are not able, because we don't have enough, we did not prepare ourselves enough in the Galut. We did not prepare ourselves enough to be able to combine, להתאחד, to integrate these two forces of the body and the spirit. להשכיל מעבר מזה שההכשר הכללי לישראל אינו כי אם בסיס ליסודו מיוחד. If we would have done the right work, then the people building the Jewish body politic would understand that in order to build the Jewish body politic, you must connect it to Neshama. There cannot be a separation of state and church in the Jewish polity, because then it would not be Jewish. If you want to build the Jewish entity, being, you cannot define it as a religion and you cannot define it as a nation. It's some strange combination of the both. It's dati leumi. And every attempt to cut these teomim Siamese twins, right? Every attempt to cut them apart would kill both. Would kill both. As I said, the spirit can remain, but it would be extremely maimed, and the body cannot live without the spirit. So if you want really to establish a Jewish state, you must integrate into it the Jewish spirit. However, the Jewish spirit is not ready to cooperate with the Jewish body, so it causes the people of the Jewish body to reject the people of the Jewish spirit and to connect themselves with the people of body from other nations, and the outcome is what we see in front of our eyes. עד שחסרון ההצלחה גרם לסכסוכי דעות ורווחים. So the fail to success had caused סכסוכי דעות, disputes, ורווחים, and the fight among brothers, שהלכו בדרך מסוכנה כזאת, that went in such a dangerous way, עד שהמנהיג הראשי נפל חלל מעוצר רעב ויגון. And that caused in the end to the fall of the head, who is of course Herzl. And here he refers to the known Agadic Midrash that Mashiach ben Yosef would be killed during the process of redemption. Now he explains why Mashiach ben Yosef has to die, because of this inability to reconnect, at least in the initial stages, to reconnect the body with the spirit. And that's why Herzl had to go. על כן, I'm in the other side of the page. על כן ראוי לנו לשים לב, להשתדל לנטיית ההתאחדות של עץ יוסף ועץ יהודה. He refers to the known נבואה of the two branches. One is Yosef and one is Yehuda, that one day would become again one tree. So the etz of Yosef is the etz of the body, such as Yosef, that took care of the food. Right? So that is Mashiach ben Yosef. This is the Mashiach that is taking care of the bodily elements. And Mashiach ben David is Yehuda, which, as we said earlier, is David HaMelech who built the Beit HaMikdash. So we need to reconnect these two elements. לשמוח בהתנערות חפץ החיים הבריאים החומריים. המפעם בכלל, he says, and he now turns to the people that sit in front of him in the shul, the Orthodox people, says, we should be happy, we should be glad when we see the materialistic side re-emerging. We should now, for them, that's a reversal of everything that we're educated on. Because we were educated on declining material, abolishing it, waging war against it, and only trying to achieve spirituality. And he says that was maybe it was good for 2,000 years, but now God pressed the button. And we are like a car that is driving on the cleaning tunnel. Now, the belt would be moving anyway, because Hashem pressed the button. We should understand it. That on one hand. But the way that we will cooperate will decide the nature of the process, the prices of the process, the speed of the process. Right? You can be in this tunnel and you can open all of the windows and let all of the water and the soap wash you inside, and you can try to play with the gas and the brakes, and you can create a lot of havoc and damage to the car and to the tunnel. Or you can cooperate. It would drive anyway, and you would be cleansed anyway. What would be the price? That's the question. And that's what Rav Kook is beginning to say. I don't know if he himself, it's very difficult to answer that. Did he know that it would take so long? Many times when you read what he writes, the feeling is that he feels that just a few years, he would explain to them and they would understand and would be able all to live happily after. And now again, the way that he writes is so many times is so poetic that it's very difficult to know if when he's describing these processes of intertwining back the body and the spirit, is this something that is happening in a day or two, or is it a process of 200 years? 100 years later, I think that we begin to feel that that is not something that would happen so fast. We are still so it's amazing to see to what extent what he wrote is still describing. You just open the newspaper, don't open it, it won't do you any good, but just open the newspaper and read the politics of what is going on now. And it's the same thing. I think that we have progressed. Is this word still allowed to be used? I don't know. But we have progressed in the process that he's speaking about. Baruch Hashem, I think we are in a much better place than where we have been 100 years ago. But the difficulties of being born, how do you say in English? משבר הלידה, right? חבלי לידה, the pains of labor, birth pains. We are still suffering them. Maybe some would say that we are already after the birth pains and now we are in the growth pains, or now we are in the adolescence. I don't know. You can call it in different names, but understanding that the troubles that we see are part of the difficulty of returning to being a nation. A nation with everything that it includes, everything that it entails, everything that it obligates us to. Many of us are still holding to the dream of, maybe as the Meraglim were holding to the dream, of remaining in the desert and given the man from heaven and just sitting there and learning Torah. There is also a second story in the parsha that we read. There is the story of the Ma'apilim going into Eretz Israel without the Aron HaKodesh. So don't think that we criticize only one side. 2 years later, in 1906, Rav Kook writes one of his most important, it's very difficult to give grades, but I may say that one of the most important essays that he wrote, that was entitled Ma'amar Hador, meaning the article about the generation, and in which he is trying to put into perspective his understanding of the generation of the Chalutzim, and mainly is writing about the people of the Aliyah Shniya. So we speak about secular and socialist people coming very strong, with very, very strong national, Jewish national spirit, and a willingness to give their life for what they believe in. And so again, it's not very long, and I don't know, I'm sure it was translated. It cannot be that it was not translated. It's extremely important. Bezrat Hashem v'bli neder, I would look if I can send you a translation of the whole thing if someone wants to read. But here I would only read a small passage. So source ד' בכל הזמנים ובכל הדורות אנחנו רואים, בדור שהוא מלא פרצות, הפרצות עוברות על פני כל חוגו המוסרי לכל צדדיו. דור שוכח אלוה, הוא גם כן דור סורר ומורה, זוהר וסורר. He says usually, when there were in the Jewish history generations that went off the derech. But usually when they went off the derech, it was throughout the whole front. So they would be religiously corrupted, they would be ben Adam lechavero, socially corrupted, corrupted in any way. But strange is our generation. Shovavu, Praiu, it's a wild and naughty generation, אבל גם נעלה וניסה, but also exhalated and impressive. רגשי החסד, היושר, המשפט והחמלה עולים ומתגברים. הכוח המדעי והאידיאלי פורץ ועולה. We see these people coming, these young people coming to Eretz Israel, and they are full of socialism, of feelings, of chesed, of charity, of righteousness, they want to create a just world. And they are willing, again, as I said earlier, to give their life for it. They are willing to live in poverty for it. You cannot say that these are corrupted youngs. The people now fighting in Gaza, secular, completely secular. Can you say that they are morally corrupted? People that are willing to give their knowingly. Some of them are mitnadvim, right? They didn't have to go. Can you say that they are morally corrupted? On the other hand, some of them are manifested, as I said, atheists, disregarding everything that we hold as holy. Not only, it's easy to hide behind what we call tinokot shenishbu, right? Babies that were captured. But some of them were raised in the Aliyah Shniya, and nowadays, in Dati homes, they were given Dati education, and they kicked at it. We have to look at the reality as it is. How can you hold these two sides? That's in a sentence. That is the tension that Rav Kook is living with from the second that he puts his foot ashore in Yafo. And he says, this generation is strange. חלק גדול מהדור הצעיר אינו חש כבוד לכל מה שהורגל. A major part of the young generation has no respect to anything that we are used to. But not because his soul is dark. לא מפני שהופלה נפשו. לא מפני שנשפל. Not because he went down. But because he went up. And what we are able to suggest is not enough. מפני מיעוט העבודה בתלמודם של יסודי הרגש והדעת שבמרחב התורה. If the only thing we can suggest and give them, I'm sorry that I'm returning to the same mitzvah all the time, but just as a symbol, I apologize. But the shaking of the light, if there's something that we have to give them, and you cannot explain why it is something, not chas v'chila to discard the shaking of the lulav, but if you cannot explain to them how the great ideals that they believe in, which we also believe in, how they are connected to shaking the lulav, if this is something that cannot be explained, they would not do it. It's just reality. I'm not saying that it's what they should do or not do. I'm just describing what is going on. In the other hand, we should understand it's not that they are corrupted. If they were corrupted, there was nothing to speak about. But they are not. They are looking. These are people that would go for a year or two in India and look for spirituality. They are searching. They are willing to take a lot of money and time and effort. The question is, why we believe in Torah? Why is it that we are not able, why they have to look so far away? If the treasure is, as they say, beneath the bridge. He says, this is a great generation. It's Ma'amar Ador, the article about the generation. He says, these are great people. Now again, just imagine what the Rabbanim feel when they see him writing it down. This is a great generation. That's a disgrace. These are people that abandon Torah and mitzvah. These are people, and they come to Eretz Israel, to the palace of the king, and here they are transgressing Torah. This is the worst. If you transgress, at least do it far away. But these young Jews come, and they leave behind everything. Some of them left behind very comfort life, and they come here to Eretz Israel to work with their hands, and to pave roads, and to live in tents, and to die from malaria. But they do not perform Torah mitzvah. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? And Rav Kook answer is, these are great people, and we need to raise ourselves and our teachings to the level where it would respond to what they are looking for. Because God, as I said, pressed the button and redemption began. And when redemption begins, great neshamot are coming down to this world and they are looking for great things. If we cannot suggest greatness, they would not follow us. Just telling them, you know, you can go with tzitzit because your father went with tzitzit, it's so nice, and your grandfather, he's not interested in that. He's not interested in that. Some will, but you want to approach as they said, to hold the ox in its, לאחוז השור בקרניו. I'm sure there is an English right, to take the bull by its horns. Thank you. If you want to take the bull by its horns, then just speaking about, yes, your father did, and that's very nice. Again, for me, it's a very major part of my spirituality, but it cannot be what would give life to this generation. We need to speak in great terms, to great neshamot, to great people. You need to give great missions. And if you fail, it is not their failure, it is your failure. That's Rav Kook. So that's Ma'amar Ador. The rest, I mean, we just in 3 minutes, I cannot read the rest. But again, you can see every sentence, it's inspiring, it's very deep, it's very difficult for me all the time to compress it. I would just say that he tried to establish in Yafo yeshiva for Rabbanim because he understood that the old Rabbanim are not going to do. And you need a new Rabbanim in his image, speaking this language. So he created the yeshiva in Yafo. He didn't, and here I have again in one sentence, Rav Kook was a great man of vision, but much less a man of acts. So he was not a man of organization. He needed people around him to organize. And just as he was writing in a very scrambled way, very deep and thoughtful and inspireful, but not systematic. So he was not a systematic man. If you want to establish a yeshiva or any other organization, you need to make sure there is money, there is food, there are students. It's not enough just to write a beautiful manifest of what the yeshiva is about. And Rav Kook find it very difficult to have these practical aspects. So in one sentence, there is a long passage, but in one sentence, the yeshiva failed, unfortunately. But he continued to write and to speak and to be attacked and to give halachot that were extremely, I mean, don't for a second think that he was some kind of a reformator looking to change halach. Very far from it. Very far from it. He was even a machmir in many of his halachot. However, part of his considerations were that this generation needs the details to be connected to the great ideals, just as we said here. I would finish this meeting with describing that in 1914, that's very sad, 1914, but I'm skipping his journey through the Moshavot. I am skipping a very important article that he wrote called Mahalach HaIdeot, in which he tried to give an overview on all of Jewish history in what we would call Hegelian terms of thesis and antithesis and synthesis, and seeing how the Jewish history is reflective of the ideals of Torah and their development. And by being able to do that, also pointing where we are in this process. So a very interesting article called Mahalach HaIdeot BiYisrael. In 1913, as I said, he's going to the journey between the new settlements. Also, beautiful stories, very interesting. We have to skip that as well. And then in 1914, he is going to Agudat Israel, to the congregation of Agudat Israel, to the big committee in Aguda, that's how they call it, Congress of Agudat Israel, that was in Schweiz, in Switzerland, in order to try to convince them to embrace Zionism. So good luck in that. However, what he was not successful in that, that we can say in very short. What was more important is that as 1914 began and he was in Switzerland, First World War broke out and he cannot return to Eretz Israel because he has Russian citizenship, and that's an enemy of the Ottoman Empire in First World War, so he cannot return to Eretz Israel. He's stuck in Switzerland. He would then be invited to England, to London, to Machzikei Hadat Shul, and in which he would be a divide, he would be part of what had brought Lord Balfour giving his declaration. So very interesting. He was continuing to work for Zionism even when he was abroad, also writing, and again, many interesting things. But because I want to speak about his later years in Eretz Israel, the next meeting, so we close down this meeting with the end of World War I, the conquest of Eretz Israel by the British Empire, and we would return to how he saw that in his vision of the redemption beginning to happen. We would speak about that Be'ezrat Hashem next week, and on his activities as he returned to establish the chief rabbinate to Eretz Israel and many other very important activities. So thank you so much. We'll meet again in Yirtzeh Hashem next week. May we have a good and peaceful week.
Rabbi, it's amazing. But I